Hey everybody, welcome to Grilling at the Green here on the Golf News Network, AM 860 in Portland, KSCI in Texas, KO something or other in Tulsa. I don't know. We got a bunch of them. But this segment is brought to you in part by Painted Hills Natural Beef, beef the way nature intended, and also Birdie Ball. Great products there. If you want to practice in your backyard or putt in your living room or what have you, go to birdieball.com there. I've asked our friend Bob Haring from Sports Illustrated to come back. And it's been almost a month since the big announcement of the PIF and Live and Tour and all of that. Caught everybody off guard. And Bob's been covering this story extensively, as much as he can, because they never give you too much information. But so I asked him about that. And also, we're going to talk about the US Open and the PGA just for grins and giggles. Anyway, welcome back, buddy.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so good to have you. Well, let's talk about the US Open and the PGA. The PGA was, to me, was a little different just because of, the live thing in the air type thing. And it's just been a different year to me all the way around. And then they were saying about could people play, couldn't they play, this and that, so on and so forth. And then a couple of weeks later, we get to the US Open. And people could play in that. And I think one thing, Bob, that people were shocked about is on the range, you saw live players coming up and talking to their old buddies on the tour, and it was just like, I hadn't seen you since yesterday. They were shaking hands, hugging, joking. I think that almost disappointed some people.
Yeah, I mean, I think where a lot of people have missed this is that I think among the players, while they might not have agreed with the decision to go, they understood the decision.
Sure.
And they tried to like make that be separate from the whole entity of live. And obviously there was some polarizing figures over there with live golf, but for the most part, these guys like a guy like Dustin Johnson. They like Kepka.
Yeah.
A lot of guys still like Bryson. There's, Kevin Na or Louis Oosthuizen, Schwartzel, who was at the Masters. These are good guys for the most part. They like these guys, and I think there was this sense that we're not going to begrudge them their decision. And look, let's be honest, they're all going to benefit from it. They were benefiting from it before this announcement. The increase in purses, these designated events, there's going to be probably 8 events next year, possibly 8, 9 events without a cut, which means if you qualify for those tournaments, you're guaranteed to getting paid. There's never been that many. And obviously $20 million purses, I think we're finding that's not sustainable. It's too much.
Yeah.
This is sort of the latest, realm of all this. That's part of the problem. Part of the reason why I think the tour reached out to them is that they got in over their heads. But the bottom line is the players are going to benefit. They were benefiting one way or the other. If they didn't go to live, they were still going to do really, really well. I mean, Rahm and Scheffler have each won more than $15 million this year already. They've still got the whole FedEx Cup playoffs to go. They've got another major to play. They could get to $20 million in earnings. You're going to have a bunch of guys make more than 5 or 6, and next year, a good chunk of money is going to be guaranteed. So I think some of the thought that they should have like turned their back on their old friends is a little misguided.
Yeah. Do you think the tournaments that are not the elevated tournaments, I've read stuff, I know you've read it too, some of the sponsors are not happy for the ones that didn't get the elevated status, didn't make the selection there, and they're kind of saying, why do I want to dump $5 or $10 million into a tournament now, when all the publicity for the most part and all that is going to go to the elevated tournaments.
Exactly. Well, and it's more than 5 to 10 million. A regular event on the PGA Tour, which has an $8 or $9 million purse, typically costs a title sponsor these days about 14 million. So now, if you are, let's say, let's pick one. Let's say uh, next year, pick one in February. Say, well, whatever the Honda Classic is, it's
Right.
not going to be called that anymore. They're almost assuredly not going to get top guys because they're going to be the week before the Arnold Palmer and the Players Championship. And there's going to be 1 week before them, the Mexico tournament. But 2 weeks before that will be two designated events. It's a perfect time to take off.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in theory, you're going to have all of the top 50 guys in the designated events. If they don't play, it's because they just want a week off. It's not likely to be because they're going to pick Honda instead. So yeah, some of these tournaments now, some of them are going to get guys like John Rahm's going to still play Torrey Pines.
Oh yeah.
Mike, like if let's say, like next year, Tony Finau is going to go defend his title at the Mexico Open.
Sure.
Rahm won the American Express in Palm Springs this year. He'll play there. There will still be guys who play the Sony. Obviously, Torrey Pines is a big one. Phoenix is not expected to be a designated event again. It still will get its players and have huge crowds and everything.
See,
But
I think Phoenix, let me interrupt you for a second there,
Mm-hmm.
Bob. I'm sorry, but I think Phoenix is going to be kind of like the Kentucky Derby. You know what I mean? It's a
Mm-hmm.
one-off, even though they're not wearing hats and drinking mint juleps there, they're drinking whatever's cold. I used to live in Scottsdale, so yeah. And I think if they didn't make the elevated events, I think that's fine. I think that'll survive because that whole city, that whole Maricopa County down there turns out for that thing, and it's crazy.
They don't need it really.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
But the thing is that the title sponsor might think it's important for TV ratings.
Yeah.
And that's where this whole thing rests. Is same with like Wells Fargo this year was a designated event. They've always had good fields. Their date is such that it's perfect. It used to be the week before the Players, which was a great date. And then when the Players moved, they moved to 2 weeks before the PGA. It was a perfect spot for a guy who
Right.
didn't want to play the week before the PGA to hone his game. And some guys made that their first tournament back after the Masters. So they always had good fields.
Yeah.
Well, now you have to pay all the extra money to be a designated event, and you get a better field, but how much better? This year they didn't even have Scheffler and Rahm at Quail Hollow, so those guys decided to make it their week off. And next year there's no guarantees; you don't have to play any of them.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but so to back to your original point, there's got to be consternation among some of these tournaments: the Houston Open, the Valero Texas Open, New Orleans, the New Orleans event, the team event.
Right.
The John Deere, which is next week. This year's Rocket Mortgage is doing okay, but I mean, when you're the Rocket Mortgage following the U.S. Open and a designated event at the Travelers, and then 2 weeks down the road is the Open.
The Open.
It's going to be
right.
tough.
Right.
It's going to be tough.
Is that your cat?
Yes, it is. Good
I have
timing.
I have one too, so it's all good.
Yeah.
Bob's got a cat. Ours is a tuxedo kitty, by the way. Do you and we're going to run out of time on this segment, so I'm just going to go ahead and take us to break. But when we come back, I want you to think about something, Bob. I want you to think about on those, just call them non-elevated tournaments. If a group of golfers got ticked off, 5 or 6 of them, I read this, think they could just go make their own tour with a bunch of those non-designated elevated events. Anyway, we're going to ask that question to Bob when we come back here on Grilling at the Green. Stay with us. Welcome back to Grilling at the Green. We're fortunate to have Bob Haring with us from Sports Illustrated. Bob's been covering this stuff for a long time. Also, we'd like to tell you, if you're really into barbecue like I am, I've got a product I recommend for you. It's called pig powder, and it's sold right down the street from Bob's house there. And it's was created by Leanne Whippen, who's my co-host on the barbecue show, and created by her father. And it is called pig powder. I use it on everything. I use it on pork and beef and chicken and all that. I use it on vegetables and salads. It's very good. So just go to pigpowder.com. If you buy enough of it, Leanne will send you an autographed picture like that. Maybe good luck in getting that. She's been working with me for 2 years. I still don't have a picture of her. Anyway, back to Bob Haring here from Sports Illustrated. Somebody floated that idea a couple of days ago, Bob, and I don't remember who it was, but they said, there's a bunch of guys that aren't in the top 10, they're not in the top 25, whatever. And even though they may be guaranteed payments next year at some things, what if they just were disenchanted with the whole thing and did what Arnie and Jack and those guys did, 40 years ago or whenever it was, and they pick off a dozen of these other events where the sponsors get disgruntled because they're not getting the TV time and stuff that we just talked about. Is that a possibility?
I think it would be difficult,
Yeah.
because first of all, it would require them to no longer be members of the PGA Tour. I mean, that's what this whole live thing has been about. I mean, when you become a member of the PGA Tour, you agree to follow their rules, which are, play a minimum of 15 events, and if you're going to play outside of the PGA Tour, um, you need to get our permission. And they typically get it granted 3 times, but they never get it granted for domestic events. And also, the tour, you sign away your media rights.
Right.
You can't appear playing golf on TV or even online, even streaming, um, without the tour's permission. So for there to be another tour, there would have to be the understanding you're leaving the PGA Tour. Okay, so now, all right, if they're all good with that and you've got enough guys willing to do it, all right, are you going to get enough sponsors to line up? Are you going to get a TV deal?
Mm-hmm.
Are you willing to play for less money? Because if the sponsors are disgruntled, they're clearly disgruntled because they think they're paying too much. So they're going to want to pay less.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means the purses have to be less. And, are you going to want to turn your back on, probably the best pension plan in sports? Um, for all the complaining, and listen, I've been behind a lot of this and feeling that the players deserve some guaranteed money, but there's a ton of perks for being on the PGA Tour. They do have a health plan.
Yeah.
They have an unbelievable pension. The FedEx Cup is, even if you don't make it to the playoffs, you get a nice chunk of money put in your retirement. That's not your money. Most of us put money in a 401k or a
Yep.
work retirement plan, and it's out of our pay. Well, this is extra. It's not out of their earnings. It's extra, and so there's a lot of things that you'd be having to say no to make something like that work. And that would require a lot of effort. Uh, it's an interesting idea, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yet it does show that this whole thing has just created so many factions, and the tour used to always be about kind of trying to take care of the masses, and now they've shifted towards trying to take care of the stars. And the stars had always complained, Phil among them, why are you taking care of those guys? We're the ones who bring all the attention. And now maybe it's shifted too much to the stars,
Mm-hmm.
because they're having a hard time paying the bills, and there's not necessarily evidence to suggest that those high fees can be supported.
I'm pretty sure those checks from the tour beat the 3 or 4% matching funds you get from your employer in your
Right.
retirement. Yeah, just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
Well, I find it very interesting because uh, to me, it looks like this thing's going to go full circle, Bob, in kind of a way, in my little warped way of thinking. You started with the tour. Greg Norman's been pissed at the tour for a million years for He's got his own reasons. He's wanted to create something like this. He finally got somebody to back him. Here they are poking each other with legal pencils for almost 2 years. They're doing that. It's costing the tour money. It's cost the tour uh in some quadrants respectability almost. Um it cost the Saudis a lot in some of those things. Some of them they don't particularly care for. They got more money than God, so they don't, that's they got their own ATM in the back. But I'm not sure the whole thing was very good for golf. But again, I say it's coming in full circle because of the agreement and the announcement 3 weeks ago. All of a sudden, some of those fractions seem to be trying to get healed over somehow. They're not quite sure how to do it in very particular instances, but they're trying to heal that over. And that just, it's like a hula hoop to me. I don't know
Right.
if you can think that analogy like that, but that's just the way my mind works, which isn't always good sometimes. But the point is, we started here, we went around here, we fought, we yelled, we screamed, we called each other names, we did this, we had guys on TV raising hell about this or that or the other thing, and then all of a sudden here we are. Now we're all buddies and we're all friends.
Yeah, I wonder if it's more a marriage of convenience, and that they're not going to be all that close. I've wondered about that. It's easy to say now, but it makes you wonder if they would have had a little more foresight, if they could have worked something out in the beginning.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to end up working with them anyway, then maybe you should have tried to do it at the beginning, and you could have staved off a lot of this angst, and you could have worked out a plan that would have worked for all. I mean, at the beginning of all of this, the PIF was really just interested in getting into golf. They wanted to sponsor events on the European tour. They've put together their own tournament called the Saudi International, which was on the European tour for 3 years. They've wanted a seat at the table. They've got this Aramco series in women's golf that funds the ladies European tour, several events which pay purses that are way bigger than most of their events. Nobody really talks much about that, but that's Aramco is the Saudi oil company,
Right.
and they have a big foothold there. Maybe again, now this requires you to put all the moral implications aside, which has been very difficult to do and will continue to be. I mean, there's a big faction of people out there that say the PGA Tour should have not gotten into business with the PIF, and the money's tainted and all that stuff. And look, if that's your belief, that I think that's fair. I think that's an opinion that I'm willing to let people have. I mean, it's hard to argue it.
Right.
But when you just look at it from a golf standpoint and take that out of it, any kind of rival was always going to be disruptive. And how are you going to fight them off? I mean, I liken it to this. What if the Saudis decided they want to get into pro football in our country? And let's say they decided to set up a rival league to the NFL and play on Sundays, just like the NFL does, and just find markets where there's no NFL. And they're willing to pay double the salaries. So they just like, back in the old days when Herschel Walker went to the USFL, they would have their own draft, try to lure guys out of college, sign free agent guys who are no longer, guys contract, Aaron Rodgers' contract coming up.
Yeah.
We'll sign him. How would the NFL like it? Especially if they had somebody to televise it, what would they do? They would try to fight it.
Oh,
Of
yeah.
course they would. So this is what the tour was faced with doing. You can't blame them for fighting it, but you might be able to blame them for going down the moral road, the political arena there with Saudi and the PIF, because now they decided to work with them, and they look like hypocrites. That's
Yep.
that's what they're being called.
Yep, absolutely. We're going to take another break. We're going to be back with Bob Haring from Sports Illustrated, among other venues. Right after this, you're listening to Grilling at the Green on the Golf News Network on iHeartRadio. Welcome back to Grilling at the Green. Again, we'd like to thank the folks at Painted Hills Natural Beef, beef the way nature intended. Bob, I want to tell you something about Painted Hills. They're from a little community in Eastern Oregon called Fossil, because there's fossil beds there. Okay. Cool little town, cow town, kind of, and all that. But what's kind of interesting about Painted Hills is the fact that there are actually painted hills over there, and you can look them up, see pictures of them, and they look like somebody took paintbrushes and went along the sides of the hills and did that. So if you ever get up this way, they do that, and also they happen to have a 6-hole golf course that they built a little town outside of Fossil called Kinzu, which there was a big lumber mill there. Of course, in the Northwest, we had lots of lumber mills at one time. They sold the lumber mill. They sold the mill. They sold the mill. They sold the houses. They sold the fencing. They sold everything. There's nothing left up on that hill except the golf course. And it was, for a long time, it was the only PGA rated 6-hole golf course in the country. So there you go. Just tell you that. Kind of a fun place to play.
Sounds great.
It is. It's quirky, but it's fun. You might, putt over an elk track or something, but you're never sure. So what happens to Greg Norman?
Yep, among the many mysteries. He almost seems to be acting as a figurehead right now, and that's the other thing. They're playing their first event this week at Valderrama in Spain, since all this went down. And there, other than what Yasser Al Rumayyan said on the day of the announcement, within the press release and on CNBC, I believe he did 1 or 2 print interviews, very brief. There's been nothing from the PIF or Live side. I got some intel on a Zoom meeting that Norman had the next day, in which he spoke positively, and this is business as usual. This opens up the doors, the barriers are down, we're charging ahead. But what is he supposed to say? If you are going to try to operate in the short term, you can't really project doom and gloom. Now, there might not be reason to project doom and gloom. We really don't know.
Right.
But Norman has said nothing. Nobody from Live has said anything publicly other than some of the players who have acknowledged that they heard themselves from Yasser. He called them on the day of the announcement to give them a heads up and basically just told them, this is going to be good, hang in there. No details. To my knowledge, at this point that we're talking, there has been no definitive word. Now, if there has, an organization that has dozens, if not hundreds of people, whether they're, employees or contractors or hired by the event, if they have told them things, they have done an incredible job of keeping the lid on it. And if they haven't, it's got to be concerning to those people. There's a lot of everyday folks working for Live,
Yep.
TV production people, communications people, the course setup people, sales people, all that
Sure.
kind of stuff. And if they're not being told anything, that's got to be, they got to be wondering if their check is cashing every time. So next step, they have an event this week. It would be nice if, as an organization, they said something. What does this mean? I mean, internally, the word I get is that they are planning for 2024. They had already been working on their schedule and venues, and some of them they had deals with. And it sounds like until they're told otherwise, they're going to keep going.
Sure.
And I guess as long as they're allowed to keep spending, they're going to keep spending. But it sure makes it hard for them to make good on their goal of selling franchises and selling sponsorships within these teams, which there was one announced last week. The team that Poulter is captain of, the Majestics, signed a deal with a crypto company, which is sort of like a player deal would be, an endorsement deal.
Mm-hmm.
But all of the guys will have the branding, and they'll have stuff at their events. And the way this was supposed to work was all 12 of these teams are supposed to be doing this on their own and paying their own way. And that would allow them to pay to pay staff, to probably pay the expenses and travel of the caddies and the players, maybe even to give some money to the players as well. But I mean, how are you going to sell that stuff if you can't tell a sponsor, well, we have a future beyond this year? Who's going to want to get involved? So unless you want to just sponsor for the last 7 events of the year.
Yeah, I don't think it helped, just from my experience in business, Bob. But I don't think it helped when, after the announcement, and then Jay Monahan came out and said, I just don't see a scenario where Liv is going forward. I'm paraphrasing, the exact verbiage there. But when you say that, and he's supposed to be the head of the new whatever they don't even have a real official name yet. I think they just call it Newco, which is short for new company. But when the guy who's going to run it comes out and says that, it's got to send some shivers up and down some spines, not only of employees and front people, and maybe the players, not so much the players, but then potential sponsors going forward. They're going to, why are we even talking about this? We don't know what's happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The thing that Jay said, I actually asked him that question that day. I was on a video call, and I asked him, do you see a scenario in which Liv is playing next year, sort of in the same realm that they are now? And he said, I don't really see that scenario.
Yeah.
He answered it pretty point blank. And if you look at the paperwork that just came out Monday, where the actual framework deal was leaked because they sent it to a U.S. Senate committee that's investigating, and I guess, I don't know if the tour leaked it, or I'm guessing they did. That was spelled out in there that Jay Monahan will, he has the ability to decide Liv's fate. But yet there's another point in there that says that the DP World Tour and the PGA Tour will act in good faith to try to see that Live Golf events get OWGR points. That's been a huge fight in this thing the whole time. I mean, there's been the idea that Monahan and Keith Pelley of the DP World Tour are on the OWGR board. They've had to recuse themselves when it comes to discussions of Live. 4 of the other spots on the board are held by the heads of the major championships. And, Liv has been stuck in limbo. They've played over a year now and they don't have world ranking points. And whether or not you believe they should get them or not, they do have a bid in front of them and it's not been acted upon. So now, but part of the agreement is they're going to make a good faith effort to get them points. But on the other hand, Jay Monahan can shut the whole thing down. Like, some of it just doesn't jive. And like, if depending on what side you're on and what you want to believe, you can spin that however you want. If I hate Liv and want Liv to go away, I'm pointing to that phrase in there. Jay Monahan gets to decide. Yasser signed the agreement. It's up to him. Why would he want them around? If I'm on the Liv side of it, I'm going, wait a minute, they have a clause in here that says that Liv is going to exist, and that that they need to, they're going to give a good faith effort to get them world ranking points. I'd be all over that. And plus, Liv is, of course, the Liv supporters are all over the idea that ultimately, while Yasser might not have the power in title, he's going to have the power with the money.
Right.
And so, he could say, look, Jay, it's your call, but if you decide to shut it down, I'm not in agreement with that, and I'm not going to give you money for X. So, that's just obviously so much of this is hypothetical, but you could see that playing out that way.
I actually think it's, in a way, it's a very shrewd, almost lawyerish deal, because if the language says best interest world golf ranking points, maybe they, and Monahan's no dummy. he can put something together where they say, okay, we're going to go back for the last year and a half, and we figured out a formula to give the live players points.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they award them those points. They welcome them back to their respective tours, whether it's DP or the PGA Tour here, and then live is gone. So he basically kept his word in the contract and did that, but I don't know. That's kind of a little skullduggery there, but I've worked with enough lawyers in my life, Bob, to tell you that that's the way some of them think.
Sure. I
So,
mean, I don't know. There probably is a way to go back and give players points for the live events they played in, and based on the fields, that might be one sort of point of concession that
yeah,
allows some of this to get done. There seems to be this vindictiveness on the side of the PGA Tour guys. They feel that these guys should be punished. They shouldn't be allowed to come right back. And while I agree that you can't just let them waltz right back because they broke the rules.
right.
But I mean, what's the penalty? How harsh is it? Do you look? I hate to equate it to that, but there have been some times in world history where the penalties were so harsh on the defeated country that they were made to feel
Yeah,
resentment.
yeah,
And frankly, that might have happened after World War I with Germany, which is why there was a World War II.
it's exactly what I was thinking.
The sanctions were so harsh that it didn't create any kind of goodwill. It created more acrimony.
Yeah,
And so you got to be careful with that. I mean, do you want to welcome Brooks Koepka and Dustin Johnson back? Okay, obviously there's some penalty to pay, but what is it? If it's a huge monetary amount plus they can't be members of the tour for X amount of time, or they can't take, I mean, how do you determine it? I mean, if you want them back, you need them playing in the events. It's going to create interest.
right.
But are you going to deny them FedEx money, or like? And that's when you go to, okay, well, maybe we just fine them, huge fine, $10 million or something. Well, is that fair? You know, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure I'd go back if I got hit with that.
Yeah.
So it's look at and look. We're just talking about one aspect of this. It could be so much of this that needs to be sorted through.
Oh, yeah. We're going to take another break. We're going to be back with Bob Haring from Sports Illustrated and a golfer in his own right. Maybe we'll talk about that in after hours. Anyway, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Grilling at the Green. I'm JT. We're talking with Bob Haring today. Don't forget to get out there and get your birdie ball products. John Breaker and his family there in Evergreen, Colorado, voted in 2022 the best indoor putting green by my Golf Spy. So there you go. Something a little different, Bob. Golf is up across the country. I saw the National Golf Foundation chart today, and it's up in different areas. Ours up here in the Northwest was like up 10 or 11%, so on and so forth. But do you think because of, and this all kind of ties in together, you've had the conflict between the tour and live, and you've had, Tiger's not playing. Rory hasn't been lighting them on fire all year. He's had good weekends and not so good weekends and this type of thing. From a television standpoint, I actually think there's viewer fatigue on some things. One, they're trying to watch tournaments that, maybe Rory or and you don't have Koepka and Johnson and these guys, they're not playing in. You have to go over to the CW to stream it if they happen to have a live broadcast that week. You do that. But I was reading online about some people actually complaining about that. They said, we are personally playing more golf because we've got viewer fatigue from all the crap that's going on in the pro circuit on the guys' side.
Interesting.
Is that
Yeah,
feasible?
possibly. I mean, I do think there's some people that are tired of this story. I will say from our standpoint in the world of covering golf, there's not been a story that's created as much interest as this. Not since, to be honest with you, since Tiger scandal.
Right.
That was on the same level. That was amazing. It was came out of nowhere, just like this. Nobody could have predicted what was about to come. We had months of uncertainty with the biggest name in the game, and this is similar to that. It whether it surpasses it or not, I think is up for debate. Recency bias probably has me leaning towards this. I was around back then, and I can remember how that was a never ending saga also. Um, but this seems bigger just because it's going to impact the game in general, as it's played at the professional level profoundly, I think.
Yeah.
And we just don't know how. Tiger was one guy. There were a lot of times when he didn't play anyway, and golf had to live without him. And obviously, it was a huge story. He was only what 32 or 3 years old at that time. It was amazing for that to all come down at that point in his life when he had so much golf left. But still, there was a sense that, okay, he'll get back to it at some point. We don't know what we're going to get back to at some point. It could be status quo through next year. But what if nothing's resolved? I mean, what if we get to January, nothing's resolved? There's going to be this constant murmuring. This will be a subject line, a storyline everywhere. What's new with this? What are you hearing? If there are resolutions, then we're going to be talking about how it's going to be implemented and what it
Right.
means. It's just sort of one of these things that doesn't seem like it's going away anytime soon.
Well, once you get once you get Congress messing around with something, it's going to go on forever. More hearings, more this. There's going to be a lot of grandstanding on each side. Um, monopoly things looked at, that the Saudi money thing looked at in all this. But I will tell you this, Bob. I have a friend who worked in Saudi Arabia. He's the guy that actually got me over there 35 years ago to do the work I did. And we were talking on the phone a few weeks ago. He goes, it was inevitable. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it was inevitable. He goes, this was going to happen. He goes, those guys at PIF and all that had this stuff in their sights for several years. And because a lot of the princes and the third and fourth tier princes and what have you over there, cousins, they're all related in the royal family and all government positions, believe me, on that for the most part. But they like to go to Europe. A lot of them like to play golf. They go to the Emirates on the weekends and they party because they can't drink in the kingdom and all this kind of stuff. And my friend said, it's just inevitable that this was going to happen. He wasn't for or against it. He was just stating the fact. So Bob and I are going to pick this up in after hours because I burned up all our time there BSing. But Bob's got some new posts up there on Sports Illustrated's website. And I always look forward to reading yours and Van Sickle's pieces all the time. Not just because I know you two, but they're very well written. You're both award-winning writers and journalists, and you put the work in, and I will pay you that compliment. You put the work in. I read some stuff by other people, and they just kind of phoned it in, I think. But anyway, that's just me. But Bob, thank you. And Bob and I will be back with After Hours here in just a few minutes, so don't go away. You're listening to Grilling at the Green on the iHeart Golf News Network radio network 24/7. Cool. Welcome to After Hours here on Grilling at the Green. I'm JT. Today we've got our friend of the show and excellent writer, Bob Haring, out there. Bob also does television. He does a little radio. He does some podcasts. He plays a little golf, stays out of his wife's way. I know that about him, so he doesn't get in trouble. He's a smart man. But what I was saying at the end of the show, my friend that lived there and worked for those guys for a long time, more than 30 years, just said it was inevitable. And, Not that he had anything to do with PIF or anything, but it was the attitude. And he was telling me, he said, you worked for him a little bit. He goes, when they target something, they don't give up. They
Yeah,
they find a way to get their point across and get their investments or whatever they're looking for in that.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's I think there's the notion that they had the ability to be patient and outlast people if they wanted to. And that's where when you heard it's not sustainable. They're not making any money. There's no revenue. There didn't need to be.
Right.
It's different than any other business. I mean, Jeff Bezos, as much money as he has, would want to see a return on investment for sure. He might have had a 5 or 8 year plan if he wanted to do something like this, but he'd still want to start seeing things go in that direction. This isn't any one person's money. There's a lot less emotion attached to it, I think. It's a sovereign wealth fund worth $650 billion.
Yep.
And it's probably going to go to a trillion, estimates say, in the next several years. It's a fund that has 300 or 400 people working on it, and they're constantly investing and reinvesting and getting returns. And so they have money in there to take chances. And they've used some of it on sports. And so if they burned a million or two or five, or excuse me, a billion or 2 or 5 billion, as incredible as that sounds to us, it's just a rounding error to those guys.
Right.
It might be a quarter's worth of moderate interest, you know, if they had all their money in a CD, in a 3 month CD, they might get that back. I mean, so like that's where people have missed this. Yeah, they don't want to lose money. They tightened the screws this year. They clamped down a little bit. The extravagance has been gone. They've toned it down.
Mm-hmm.
They clearly they wanted to make a splash and then they wanted to rein it in. And I've read these things. You have too. They invest in Uber, they invest in FedEx, they invest in tons of U.S. companies. The last I checked, Uber has not made a profit. Look how long they've been around.
Yep.
10, 12 years. I mean, but they they obviously believe in what they have and think one day they're gonna make a lot of money. And I mean, that was sort of the concept with this. If they could have gotten to the point, and maybe they still think they will somehow, of selling these 12 franchises. Again, let's just take a number, 100 million. I think that's excessive. I don't know if anybody pays that. But let's say you had a decent TV deal, and as part of that, your brand is going to be splashed on TV every week that Live plays. You're going to have a lot of attention in the towns you go to. Maybe you're just a rich guy who loves golf and wants to rub elbows and thinks this is fun to throw this money into. Well, 100 million, Live was going to keep 75 million of it, because it was 75-25. If you did that 12 times, you're getting close to $1 billion back.
Right.
Not to mention their stake in the team still that they would own, and all the other revenue streams that they'd have. Now, was that doable in 2, 3, 5, 8, 10 years? I don't know. But clearly that was their vision. And I can't imagine these guys step into these things and not think it down the roadways.
I think the point you just brought up, Bob, is very spot on because if you look at a lot of things in our country and a lot of how things have changed, especially maybe over the last 30 years or so since we've had cell phones and more advanced technologies, we have kind of become a country of instant gratification. A lot of other countries around the world, and I've been to them and you've been to them, they don't have that, and they don't have that mentality. They have the long range kind of plotting. They want to make progress, but they don't have to hit a touchdown on every set of plays, so to speak. You know what I
Yep.
mean? They gain 20 yards, they do this, they do that, and maybe after 4 or 5 of those types of series, they get into the goal, into the end zone, and it's all good. But I think societally on our country here, and I'm not knocking it. This is the best place to live on earth, but I'm just saying, I think we've gotten that instant gratification, and especially with social media, if something's wrong, we're going to tear it apart in 15 seconds or less and move on,
Sure.
like that. And that's not the mindset of the rest of the world.
Right.
Yeah. So
Yep. No
I,
doubt.
I remember when I got my first cell phone, and then I thought it was very cool. And then I got my first cell phone bill, uh, which was $800 for a month because I was
Right.
calling everybody saying, "Hey, I got a new cell phone, my car," like that. Um, so put on your prognostication hat, and let me throw some names at you, and you can give me the over and under to see how they shake out. Okay. This is just fantasy. This is like Bob and Jeff's fantasy sports uh, betting game here. All right. Let's start with the easy one. Greg Norman stays.
I would say no.
And it'd be like, 80-20 that he's gone.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. If you want me to do it like that, I would
Yeah.
say 80-20, he's gone. Yes.
Okay. And then Monahan.
That to me is more like 60-40, he's gone. I'm not sure if he can survive this.
And just off the betting track for a second, who would they put in his place?
That's a great question because um I mean clearly they have executives at the tour who know the ins and outs,
Sure.
but they've never had to like scramble like this. Monahan's just the fourth commissioner in PGA Tour history, going back to 1968. I mean, the very first commissioner was a kind of a golf statesman named Joe Dye, and he had been with the USGA, and he was kind of viewed as a peacemaker because there had been friction between the PGA Tour and the PGA of America.
Sure.
Well, then he was only on the job for 5 years, and Dean Beeman became the commissioner. I'm not sure how the circumstances played out, but he was a player, and he had the support of players. And while he became a very, very shrewd businessman, and the tour has a lot to owe to him to this day still, I would think it would be very hard for a player to ascend to that position now, because of all the other things that are involved.
Yeah.
After that, Fincham had worked under Beeman for many years. Monahan had worked at the tour for a good 8-10 years. There's been a system in place to groom people, and my guess is they thought this decision was 10 years off. Jay's 53. Fincham was in his late 60s when he retired. So Beeman was younger. He was more like 56 or 57, and it was a bit of a surprise because he wanted to go play some senior golf, which he did.
Mm-hmm.
But still, Fincham was there. He was actually the deputy commissioner. Monahan had been named deputy commissioner. So it's almost like this was the hand-picked guy. There's no such transition in place right now because clearly nobody saw this coming. I mean, Jay's a young man. He's been in the job for 6 years, 5-6 years. If he wanted to stay in it without any kind of issues like this, he could work another 7 to 10, 15 years if he wanted. So that's where, like, be careful what you wish for. Like, you want to push him out because you're mad. All right, well, now you got to replace him, and typically if you want to go outside, that's going to take a while. That's a
Yeah.
vetting process that requires a lot of time. I mean, so then what, do you name an interim? Or I mean, so that's why I don't put it as strong as I do Norman. Like 60, I'm 60-40 thinking he might leave, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be right away.
Well, they're not going to post it on Indeed if they want a new commissioner. There's a certain circle of people that they look to. They also look to people like Condi Rice and that type of thing, to those people that have been international notoriety, different things. It's probably something that they wouldn't ask Haring and Tracy to do. You know what I mean?
I don't think so.
I
I'm
don't
not
think
too
so.
worried about getting asked. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so. Okay, let's move on to our prognostications here. who is the first person out of Tiger's side? But we've got Johnson and Kepka and Rory and that kind of upper echelon group. And these are kind of the senior statesmen of that group. Who's the first one to walk away for good
To walk away
from
from,
competitive golf? I mean, from being on the tour or being in live, either one. Um,
I
because you've got guys like Poulter and that crew that they've already
right.
kind of hit their apex and they're just getting some nice checks and having some fun. So
I have to think that would be Dustin Johnson. He's I believe he's 38 now. He's won two majors. He's made a lot of money. He walked away from the PGA Tour with no ill will. He never said
yeah.
anything bad about him. He resigned his membership. And, if Liv plays on for the next couple of years, I believe he was signed for 4. I think he'll honor that.
Mm-hmm.
And then he'll leave. Maybe he'll play a few events here or there. He'll play the Masters and because he can, and the U.S. Open. Or
Right.
I could be totally wrong, but you're asking who's the first to walk away. That's who I see from that group.
How does Rory survive this? Because Jay and the guys at headquarters kind of had him as the mouthpiece, the face of the tour, because he's still active. Tiger made a few statements, of course, early on in that, but then he got hurt again, and you know the drill better than anybody. But Rory really became the face of the tour position, understandably so. But when I saw him at a couple of the pressers, Bob, he just looked so tired to me. And he's not an old guy. He's, what is he, 32 or something now?
34. Yeah. Listen,
34.
I think Rory's worn out on this. He put himself out there. He took on the mantle for the PGA Tour. He pushed hard for this designated event system. He's been a de facto spokesman for the tour on this a lot, and I think
Right.
it's worn him out. And he's tired of it. He's not playing this week at the Rocket Mortgage, but he attended the tour policy board meeting there. I mean, so he, on a week that he's not playing, that I'm guessing that's something he wouldn't have wanted to do.
Yeah.
But because of the situation, that's what he's doing. And yeah, I think Roy's kind of worn out. I think it's impacted his game in some ways. He's still so good that he puts himself there, but obviously he's not had great Sundays now for a while.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. Open was there to be had for him. So was the Memorial. So was the Canadian Open. He was only 2
Mm-hmm.
back going in the final round. Wasn't able to
Right.
get it done at any of them.
Yep. Yep. Well, and I give, on that note, I also give Wyndham Clark a little kudos there that he hung in there. Of course, I'm an Oregon State guy, and he went to, U of O. So yeah, my support is only so much. But anyway,
Exactly.
anyway, it's all good. Okay, so who do you think will be the first major sponsor coming into the 23-24 season that is not on an elevated event that will say, I'm done?
Yeah, good one. Well, I mean, Honda's already won.
Mm-hmm.
They might have been bailing anyway before all of this, but they if they weren't, then I think this was the final straw. Um, Trying to think of if any of them are tenuous as it stands right now. Look, it's I'm not even really guessing here, but AT&T has pretty much told the tour that they are not going to be back at the Byron Nelson after next year.
Mm-hmm.
Now, AT&T also sponsors Pebble Beach, and Pebble Beach is expected to be a designated event. So they're clearly pumping a lot of money into the tour, and the Dallas area being AT&T's home base, they're sort of expected to stay involved in that event. So, they're a hard one to put on this too, because they're buying into it in one of their tournaments and bailing on the other one.
Sure.
Um, but look, Sony's been a long time sponsor. I don't think they're real happy, or it'd be hard to believe they're real happy with the minuscule ratings they get for the Sony Open. A lot of that has nothing to do with this current situation. When you play up against the NFL playoffs, you're just asking for trouble. It's another subject, but
Yeah.
the whole thing about moving the events from September to get away from the NFL and college football was obviously understandable, because the tour was having a hard time competing its playoff events against that. So they
Right.
moved it up so that they would be completed in August, which is a smart move. But they've never addressed January, where it's worse. I mean, 40, 50 million people watch playoff football. 25 million are watching the first rounds. How are you going to get, I'm a football fan too. It's my job to watch golf, and I'm wanting to watch the football.
Right.
So how that is a problem. And so if you're the Tournament of Champions at Kapalua, I think does fine. I mean, obviously it's kind of the first tournament. It's a beautiful setting, good field. Then the Sony comes along. All right, we've gotten a little bit of a golf fix, but oh, by the way, there's 3 games on Saturday and 3 games on Sunday for the NFL, and I don't got time to fit in golf. If I'm Sony, I'm sitting there going, man, that's a tough pill.
Yeah.
So like they could be one where they're not a designated event, they're not assured of a great field, and they're kind of getting battered already.
Well, I think too, I think you're right on the right track there, because it used to be Masters was the big kickoff across the country for civilian golf. Once the Masters was held and you watched it on TV, you pulled your clubs out of the garage and you started playing. That has moved back, even though Masters is still a huge deal and the kickoff. I actually think, as far as televised golf, that it's waste management, the Phoenix Open.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because it's fun, it's a party. You got all kinds of celebrities showing up there. You've got, pro-ams that people are having a ball with, and all of that. And so that is what, 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks difference between that and the Sony,
Yeah.
something like that. If you,
Listen, there's so much more that goes into this.
yeah,
The tour is going to play if they have people willing to sponsor their events.
sure,
But from a commercial aspect, from a true fan aspect, they'd be much better off waiting until February 1st to begin, because let us develop an appetite for it.
yeah,
Let us miss it a little bit. You come out with a tournament right away the first week of the new year. We're just coming out of the holidays. There's college football galore, bowl games. Now these we're gonna have playoffs in college football
yep,
as well. That's a time a lot of our sports minds are that, and there's no other sport that kicks off the season with as little fanfare as golf. Obviously, opening day of Major League Baseball is huge. The NFL now is big. Hockey and the NBA have a big celebration when they start. Not golf. It's kind of a slow opening, and I just think if it were possible, and again, there's a lot that goes into this. It's easy for me to say, but if
right.
you waited until late January or even February 1st to start, your commercial product from a TV standpoint would be so much better received.
You would break Mark Rolfing's heart, but I agree with
Yes.
you. Yeah,
And that's it. And that's the other side. What, you're not going to play in Hawaii? Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, of course that would be silly, but maybe there's another place for it. But again, any place you take a tournament away from is bad for that community. So
yeah.
there's always a fallout to it. Me saying something like this, I preface it by saying it's not that easy, because you're impacting other people, and maybe it's worth it to not impact those people. But if you're just looking at this from a consumer objective, getting as many eyeballs on it as possible, then less is more, if you ask
Right.
me.
Right. Right. Is there one tournament that Bob Herring wouldn't mind if it went away?
Oh wow, that's a good one. That's probably not fair, I guess. Um,
I don't have to be fair on the
you
show.
know, you know, look, I have no problem with the venue, but I don't think that the New Orleans event
Yeah.
is working that great, the team event. Um, uh, I'm not, I'm just, I think it needs to be restructured. I thought it was a good try by them to do something different, and we do need some different formats.
Hmm.
I think, and that frankly is why Live, I thought if they would have gone down the road of being additive and we just want to give you something different, that might have gone over differently. Like, look, we got no problem with the PJ Tour, but hey, look, you know, there's nothing wrong with a 54 hole event wearing shorts and a shotgun start once a month,
Yeah.
you know, going down that road. And that's why I think the New Orleans idea was fine. But it's a huge field. It's hard to attract a good field with all these other big tournaments. I'm not saying they should abandon New Orleans. I'm just saying I'm not sure that that format is has been great.
I'm not sure everybody that watches it understands that format, honestly.
Yeah, it's you know it's meant to be a little bit like the Ryder Cup, one day of best ball, one day of alternate
Right.
shot. And you know, in that regard, it maybe helps the US especially, you know, find some teams. But then, you know, there've just been some weird oddities about it too. I mean, there's been some strange teams, and there's 80 players, you know, 40 team or excuse me, 160 players, 80 teams. That's a lot.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to make it special. There's got John Daly and David Duval were a team this year. I mean, those guys shouldn't be in a PJ Tour event. So certainly not Daly, you know,
No.
at 57 or 8 years old, you know, and they missed the cut by a mile, you know. So in any case, I know I could think of some others. You know, I just think a little bit of contraction isn't the worst thing.
Food's good though in New
Yes.
Orleans.
Oh, well, that's why I say I don't think you can abandon the location. Yeah.
Food's good. All right, just a couple more, and this is and you just touched on it a minute ago. Is there somebody uh that still plays on the tour occasionally that should just say, I'm done, that you've covered for a long time? Maybe they do it because they still like to get out there and do it. Maybe their sponsors expect them to play. What, I don't know what their personal reasons are. But sometimes when I look at like Daly, and I watched him for years, I saw the talent he had, his personal demons. That's a whole different story. But I'm just talking
Yeah.
about the golf. But now you know, he's an older guy. He's got bad knees, got a bad back, whatever like that. Maybe he should just somebody like that should just maybe the tour could put together and like they used to have years ago, the exhibitions. And you
Yeah.
could have John come in and somebody else uh you know play four holes or something, and people get to see him at some sort of pro-am tournament or something. I don't know. But is there somebody that you think should hang up the putter?
Well, you know, Daly still plays Champions Tour golf, which I don't begrudge any of those guys doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure he should be playing the British Open and the PGA anymore. He can barely get around. You know, he's
Right.
got a bad knee. He's been given a card at the PGA. The Open won't give him one. You know, you start to run into the idea: are you taking a spot from somebody?
Right.
You know, and so, you know, last year was St. Andrews where he won. I wouldn't have begrudged him playing there. But yeah, it's hard for me though to name anybody else on the regular tour because if you're not competitive, you don't. It's hard enough to stay out there.
Right.
You know, I mean, so I guess if you're an exempt player and you have like I I realize this isn't what you're asking, and he's a different animal all around.
Sure.
But I hear it all the time. Well, you know, Tiger should just retire. Why does he even bother? You know what? That's not our business. If
Yep.
that guy wants to go out there and crawl around and play, that's totally on him. That's he's earned it. He's exempt. He's a lifetime member. And I would never begrudge and to ever suggest that we should tell the guy that he can't play to what, just because he can't win all the time.
Yeah.
I don't think that should be an issue. I mean, they have rules in place for these older players. I mean, and if the rules allow them to play, I'm all for them getting to play.
Okay, let's do something positive here, Bob, and then I'll let you go here. Um, Besides yourself, who's your favorite sports writer?
Oh wow. Let's see. Well, I'll give you an old school one, and then I'll I'll give you a more recent, more
Okay.
my vintage. Old school is a guy named Bob Verdi, who I kind of grew up reading with the Chicago Tribune when I was a
Mm-hmm.
kid, and he moved on from there to write for Golf World and Golf Digest, and just a terrific guy and really really good at what he did. And I think my favorite one now is Chuck Culpepper, writes for the Washington Post, and Chuck's been in a lot of different places.
Sure.
Really versatile. Like, he was at the US Open, he's going to be at the Women's World Cup, and he was at the French Open before the US Open. Just covers a lot of sports, very big into college football. And just, pretty much nails it every time he goes out there.
Very good. Now, who's your favorite play-by-play person besides me? Because I don't count because you're on the show today. But the point is, who's your favorite announcer? TV.
I would still go with Bob Costas. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just really have always liked him. I mean, there's so many good ones.
Oh yeah.
I mean, obviously in golf, I have a high regard for Jim Nance. But if you're going beyond that, it's hard for me to think. A guy like Costas who's done a lot of different sports. Obviously, baseball's his big one,
Right.
but he's done NFL. He did the Olympics, all the Olympics. He's been involved in golf at times over the years. Just very versatile. And Mike Tirico is a former colleague of mine at ESPN who is now at NBC. Just the ultimate pro.
Yeah.
Just such a workhorse.
I was gonna throw Mike's name out there because one week he can be covering golf and then he could be at Churchill Downs and then he can be at the World Figure Skating Championships or whatever. I don't know him personally like you do, but he seems just to have everything covered and always well prepared. That's a big deal for me. Anyway, Bob Haring, thank you, buddy, for being with us again. And I always enjoy our little chats. Put it that way.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate you having me.
You got it. We'll be back next week. Everybody have a great 4th of July weekend. If you notice my little backdrop here, little fireworks and all that. But we'll be back with a new show next week here on Grilling at the Green. So, Bob, you and your family have a great 4th, and we'll do the same up here.
Thanks. That sounds great. Appreciate it.
You got it. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.